Look at that. 10 currencies that beat the dollar in 2025.
Whoa.
There you go. Very topical year end here as we wrap up 2025. Wanted to look at 10 currencies that beat the dollar. Beating the dollar was a very easy hurdle this year as we had a full, this list I looked at all 20 US dollar pairs offered by tastyfx. So by no means extensive of the entire world, but extensive of all major currencies to trade and available for trading here in the US. And the narrative, as everyone probably knows by now, US dollar, one of the worst years for it in recent memory by some metrics, looking at like the dollar basket. Its worst year since 2017. Specific pairs, even more extremes there. And it really shakes out to a lot of these fundamental drivers. The Trump administration on a thesis of de-dollarization. We're looking back at Liberation Day. If we're looking at equities and some of those risk-on assets, that was more of a shakeout in terms of, fear. And he walked back some of the tariffs, the magnitude, and even the duration. But U.S. dollar really didn't recover from that as we got some of this more sell America trade where we saw traditional, correlations start to unravel. We had stocks, bonds, and dollar all falling for the U.S. as global investors moved out of U.S. assets. That started to recover in some other asset classes, but definitely some irreversible damage so far to the U.S. dollar. Also had some narratives like Fed independence threats, that, more wishy-washy, less quantifiable. But political pressure on the central bank spooked some investors, and even if they haven't acted as such, as politically motivated, as of yet, we do have a new Fed chair coming in that'll be appointed by President Trump, and some of those investors that were spooked not back into the U.S. dollar. Other things like the big beautiful bill, some fiscal concerns, growth starting to slow down, and a lot of these things that by themselves, not huge drivers, or should I say, not huge effects so far that we felt through the economy, but definitely enough to shake confidence and not get a bunch of these flows back, which has left the U.S. dollar hammered from, also the end of 2024. We were very strong, and we'll see in some of these charts that we were at some pretty big extremes. So definitely an interesting year for U.S. dollar and for FX trading. So want to get through 10 of these currencies that you might not keep on your radar, but talk through some of the nuances pretty quickly. If we can go to the next slide, we'll see number 10, Norwegian krone. So this one rebounded on the U.S. dollar weakness. All of these graphs will look pretty similar to some extent, but this one among the European pairs, the weakest, because this one more historically correlated to oil prices and oil not having a good year itself. So even though this is still an 11% gain, rounded up to 12%, definitely an underperformer in terms of European pairs. Kicking it over to number 9 on the next slide.
Hold on. That's an interesting, Jim. So you're saying that thing is Norwegian krone is tied to oil?
Yeah, on exports. Yeah.
Is there a lot of oil exported from Norway or something? Or I really don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't read too much into it, but we have seen the correlation there. Number 9, South African rand, like we were just talking about, gold strength, commodity strength, and eventually risk-on flows. You see the little tick up, as we'll see in some of these emerging market currencies there in April, where the U.S. dollar did gain on some of those scares of tariff talks and the threatened global tariffs. That all shaken out as risk-on sentiment came back. Global equities across the board rising to double-digit numbers annually. And this has lifted this currency to make it, as well as some stabilization politically for South Africa, has made this an attractive emerging market play as people look away from more haven currencies and to risk on currencies like the rand. Kicking it over to number 8, we've got the Swiss franc, the one you know very well, Mr. Mike. This one, it gained definitely as some of those, the Sell America trade. This one definitely a benefactor, but as we'll see, to the tune less of an effect as the euro, as we did see. It wasn't a total risk off move throughout the year. Higher risk currencies gaining more than the Swiss franc, but European currencies across the board, as we'll see from this list, 5, 6, maybe even 7 on here, all European currencies. Getting over to number 7, we've got the Israeli shekel, almost 13% here, and this one a big surprise, not on the tariff escalation, but the conflict that broke out in the Middle East, which some people might have expected to weaken the shekel dramatically, but the expectations and the fallout there was that this conflict was regionalized and didn't escalate, which that might have been way more priced in than the conflict outbreak in and of itself, localized and shekel the benefactor there. Number 6, we've got the Polish zloty. Have you ever heard of that one?
No.
Nope.
So this one, a similar, more random European currency, but higher yields here and better growth has put this one higher than other pairs like the Norwegian krone. Number 5.
Zloty and pierogies. I need some zloty to buy some pierogies. Got it.
Glopki, Zloty.
Number 13, our highest traded pair in the world, euro dollar, coming in at 13.4% gain on the year. Absolutely crazy for a relatively stable pair. And this one, rising on multiple occasions on just that broad dollar selling, a most liquid place to go on some of those Sell America narratives, and as well as, their cutting cycle is over, it seems to be, while we're still going down. And then some other narratives like the promise of increased spending on issues like Ukraine. That's a bit ongoing. We'll see if that conversely shakes out of the euro in 2026 as some of those storylines hopefully come to a close, that Ukraine-Russia conflict. Coming in at number 4, we've got Mexican peso, also at 13%, 13.6. This one, we've got some carry with, a higher yielding interest rates, higher yielding currency, and trade resilience, as this one, much like the Canadian dollar we've seen, actually not as impacted by those tariffs. If I was to summarize it, I would say it was definitely a target for a lot of these tariffs, but the shakeout was that even though they were held to a 25% tariff, most of the goods fell under an old trade agreement that exempted a lot of those tariffs from things that would affect the Mexican economy. So interesting to see this one appreciate to a very high degree. Number 3, going back to Europe on the next slide, the Czech koruna, one of the krone variants. This one, solid fundamentals in Czech, but not as much of that carry dynamic, which we'll see in the next 2, but still 15%, pretty good. Number 2, kicking it over to the Swedish krona, almost 17%. And this one, we had some more sustainable inflation in Sweden, which then trickled down to the central bank decisions, keeping those rates higher, and helped Sweden outperform much of Europe. This one, a pretty consistent chart here, much like the euro, but not as much to the US dollar side really ever. No real upticks, even though the sustained move was in the first 3-4 months of the year. Really no love for the US dollar in this pair. for the last 7 months, which is pretty interesting to see. And number one, Hungarian forint. This one, some high yields in this currency, some carry inflows, but also just more stability and something like that South African rand, where the risk sentiment not only brings it from the US dollar to perhaps the euro, but then further out on the curve to some of these more exotic emerging markets like Hungary. And if that was your investment at the beginning of the year, pretty good return.